Welcome everybody, it's Rev. I wanted to just give a few of my thoughts on the Edison meta and where I see it heading, since my subscriber base seems to enjoy these types of videos. I've had a few people also request some videos of me, like which decks take the most skill, which take the least skill. That's a dangerous rabbit hole to go down, because I think I have some somewhat controversial opinions on that, and then also I think there's kind of like two different videos you could make, like what decks are very difficult like right when you start them, and what decks are very difficult at the highest level of play. And I feel like those different tier lists would be very different. But really, I just wanted to talk about where I see the Edison meta right now and where it's headed, and not necessarily like a tier list video, but where I think strengths and weaknesses lie with more or less just some of the decks, how they're built, and tech choices. As a reminder, it's always helpful if you subscribe, share the video, whatever it is. But um, I was mostly prompted to make this video by a few different, I don't know whether or not to call them innovations. Yeah, I guess they are innovations, or developments in the meta, which are more or less the Fishborg Frog deck or Forgs, and then the Gigaplant deck, which our good friend, associate, and cohort Marcus Law made, slash invented, um, which at this point actually means Bongo and Associates LLC has invented most decks in Edison. Because they have Alistair right now, who invented Forks. James Ark, the James Ark invented Vayu Turbo. Marcus Law invented Gigaplant. James Ark invented Dream Frogs, so on and so forth. So, and I believe Ludo actually invented Blackwings. So they may have actually invented um, all decks. Now that I'm thinking about it, like especially with Marcus Law inventing the new hybrid. So that's pretty sick. Now I wanted to talk about something I've discussed for a very long time now, which I still think holds true, and I believe, in hindsight, it seems obvious, but I still think I was the first to more or less kind of identify it, which is that the meta is very um, defined by deck dev and oppression, um, and decks that can run those cards and decks that are resilient to those cards, which I think Blackwing and Vayu do the best. Now, I do want to talk about a development on how these two cards interact with both Forgs and Gigaplant, and kind of where I see Blackwing and Vayu. So I still do think Blackwing and Vayu are incredibly good decks and are in the top tier. But what I'm kind of seeing with these like ultra combo decks, like with Forgs and Gigaplant, is the ability to like even make Blackwings too slow, like at times. Like it feels like the games can be over and sometimes are over either turn one or turn two, or like on like a slower game like turn three or four with these decks. So it kind of makes me like sometimes when I play Blackwings feel like my deck is too slow. And like this is supposed to be one of like the fastest aggro decks in the game, which is kind of wild. I'm a little bit less certain on kind of how powerful I think Gigaplant is, just because I don't have that level, or that much experience with it, either playing with it or playing against it. It's mostly just film review, but um, I kind of want to talk about what the implications are with Vayu, in my opinion, with the prevalence of Forgs and Gigaplant, and just also secondarily at the later half of the video how it differs from Dragon Turbo and what constitutes a good combo deck. So if Blackwing some games, and I won't say every game, I'll say some games feels too slow to win against these two decks, where does that leave Vayu? And I'm talking about the like original Vayu, which would be, you know, one hamster, one charge, three Raikou, or two hamster, three Raikou, the two Caius builds more or less, and not necessarily the like virus Vayu. Which I'll just put this up here, even though it's down here to talk about. Um, I think this deck is going to get outpaced the way it's being built currently. I think you are going to more or less, like as these decks gain popularity, which I certainly think they will, especially because I think it draws in more modern players. Like modern players will have a much easier time learning and playing decks like Forgs and Gigaplant, as opposed to something that takes like more positional and like technical play skill like Blackwings or Vayu. I think these decks take an incredibly high amount of skill, but it's a lot more memorization and like learning lines, and like board states are considerably less important on like how you're going to play into things, just because there are just too many turns where you kind of just like say like you have it or you don't, like or the game just is going to slip through your fingers. So like just the importance of that skill I think is lower in combo decks, and it always has been and will be. Um, but where I'm going with the value point is I think value is going to have to adapt to become even faster, and I think most value lists are going to have to move towards a virus E type build, whether or not that means an extra grepher. Almost, I would almost say like non-negotiable, like main deck devs. I think like the meta is just like becoming too fast. I don't think you can be setting Raikos. So I think like a virusy version of Vayu, maybe not pure virus, but virus E or virusier version of Vayu is going to have to be the way moving forward based on the way a lot of decks are shaping up. Secondarily, I think for the last few, I don't know, it's probably not a year at this point, but for at least maybe the last few, probably like 6 months or more, main deck oppressions were extremely rare in Blackwing and Vayu, and I think these two cards may have to be main decked. More so oppression. Uh, just because I think the game ones are too important, and there are going to be times where you can stick an oppression and win versus Forge or Gigaplant. Now, I do think deck dev is considerably weaker into Gigaplant, and oppression is significantly stronger into Gigaplant. Deck dev is good. Deck dev and oppression are good versus Forgs game one. So, if you kind of split the difference there, maybe you'd say, oppression is the main worthy one, or something like that. But I do think, just based on value typically being the slower deck, unless you open like Greffer, value pitch, swing for 4K type hands, I think it's going to need to be built to be a little bit more speedy, a little bit more stunny with oppressions and deck devs, and a little bit less RPS dependent with Raikos. Now, I think Raiko's an insane card. It's your best, generic removal. It gives you free wins with mills. So, I'm a big fan of like the Spiralist that had the proactive card like Charge and like just two Raikos to just kind of like get in motion and have starters. I'm just not sure the way is like a really cumbersome Caius and like heavy hamster package at this point. Um, so those are my thoughts on value. Blackwings, I don't think has much room to be built differently. It's got like 35 core cards more or less, and your flex spots are going to be oppressions, deck devs, whatever you feel out the meta to be. I am a big fan of deck dev in the main. I think oppression in the main could make a resurgence just because Blackwings have been cutting this card quite a lot. The other thing I kind of want to talk about is um, like just frogs in general and what I think the most powerful frog variant is. I think hero frogs definitively are just getting pushed down to a lower tier by forgs. Um, and I think that's just because they're too slow. And you still run a lot of conditional cards that require other cards to be good, but like if you're doing that, you might as well just win on turn like 1 or 2 with forgs. Or I guess say like I'll just say between turns 1 and 3, like with forgs, because there is like some setup with like reckless, like drawing a sweeper. Um, it's also too slow into Gigaplant. Hero Frogs is still weak into the bird decks, so I just don't necessarily think it's very well positioned right now. It has a lot of like hard lose type matchups, whether or not it's like GBs or something like that. So I think the deck unfortunately is too slow, despite it being probably still the premier control deck of the format. I'm just not entirely sure with how fast the format's becoming. Um, it's where you want to be. Um, I would say that I think games are going to get considerably more high rolly and shorter, whether or not that's because of deck dev, a stock oppression, or an insane combo line between Forgs and Gigaplant. Now, the one thing I do want to say about Gigaplant is I'm considerably less certain about my opinion of this deck just because I just haven't put like the time into understanding it that well. So I'd take my opinion on Gigaplant with a grain of salt, but I still think it's an incredibly powerful deck. It kind of leads into the discussion that I wanted to talk about with Dragon Turbo, which is I think if you're running a combo deck, in my past videos prior to Gigaplant and Forgs, coming on the scene, I said the premier combo deck was Dragon Turbo. I think at this point that is very much so no longer true, and I would go as far as saying I don't think there is a place in the meta for Dragon Turbo at all because it's considerably weaker. Well, I would say considerably weaker, but it's weak to deck dev, it's weak to oppression. Your engine's way bigger. Your end boards are way weaker. Yeah, you get to run rejuve, but like when you think about the refill that Forgs has, it's probably better. And you like if you want to play like a two-turn game, like you can set up with Forgs or Gigaplant like an actual stun board with a bunch of negates. I think Gigaplant does a much better job of like building those like Omni negate boards, more like modern type stuff. I think Forgs is probably better at like pure OTK boards. Um, I think Dragon Turbo, like the only thing it has going for it as like a combo deck is maybe just it plays through Gores a little bit better, which I don't think is necessarily all that important. But the crackbacks are way worse when you play Dragon Turbo. You're still weak to both like premier side deck cards. Your engine's less flexible. Um, the only real reason to play it is just to kill through Gores like Fader type stuff, which is good, but I just don't think there's much reason to play it. And like the reason I'm really kind of high on Gigaplant right now is just like it's resiliency to deck dev. Like yeah, you can still get blown out by a deck dev just based on like the way the deck's constructed, depending on how many cyber valleys you run, like if it hits like a key lone fire at the wrong time and you can't recur it. But I still think as like a combo deck, if you are more resilient to like half of like the premier stun cards of the format, that's like really, really good. So I have my eye on this. I think we're going to see it topping quite a bit lately. Not lately, in the future. Um, in addition to Forgs, I just think there's probably a pretty high learning curve with both of these decks that is going to take the player base some time to refine, and there's going to be honestly a lot of scrubs on these decks for a while until they get good, and then it's just going to be like any other deck. Like Blackwings is like a premier scrub deck. Like there are just a lot of bad players that play it. It's like the starter deck of the format. And then there are like a handful of good players with it. I think the number of good players with these decks is going to get higher and higher as education, um, you know, sees its way, or I guess sees its way through the community. So I've said my piece on Dragon Turbo. I'm not saying it's entirely useless. Like I just think like if you're playing a high roll combo deck, you just have better choices at this point and more resilient choices. And then also, better like two-turn clock choices at this point. I think Forgs is the best frog deck. I think Hero Frogs is incredibly poorly positioned right now, just because like more of like the collateral damage also. Like if the game is going to be forced to like have bird decks, which are like the best, I won't say real decks, but like kind of non-combo decks of the format to be maining oppression and deck dev, like that still does hurt Hero Frogs as collateral damage game one. So I just don't think it's in a great spot right now. Um, Now, secondarily, I think I'll say this again, and I'm just going to keep this short because I've been pounding the table on this for a while. But I think Pure Lightsworn is an incredibly powerful deck. Um, really, just because it gets to create a lot of non-games in different ways, whether or not it's just killing the opponent very quickly, whether or not it's setting up a decree versus a bird deck, a consecrated light versus a bird deck. And really, the recurring theme with all of these decks is the ability to create non-games. So the most amount of non-games for the two bird decks are going to be created by deck dev and oppression, which is important. Whirlwind also sometimes return with value or dark armed, whatever it is. Um, the combo decks are like kind of designed to create non-games. You kind of just win, before the opponent can react, more or less. It's just non-interaction dot deck. Like, that's the whole point. So I think they're very, very strong. Um, Lightsworn in just a different way. I think you get to run a lot of very good cards. You get the most broken draw card, you get the best boss monster, you get broken side cards, you get to create non-games. I just think the deck has a lot of things going for it. You get a broken hand trap. Uh, it's a really, really strong deck. You even get like probably the best tribute monster in Celestia in the format. So um, I don't know why people are sleeping on this, and I think like the more high rolly the format gets, um, the more you're going to be forced to play decks that can win extremely quickly, like Judgment Dragon or Lightsworn rather. And then the last thing I want to talk about in terms of main deck choices before I talk about side deck type stuff is Dark Refer and like the hybrid wings. Now there are a lot of iterations with this. Whether or not it's like the Marcus Law build that just runs like one Blizz, one Kalut, one Bora. And then there are a few other builds that I've experimented with that are like more beatdown versions, which run like 3 Kalut and cut some number of Boras and like more or less just sub out the like Plague utility package and like the return package for just like something a lot closer to Blackwings that's trying to end the game quickly, set up deck devs quickly. Um, and I'm not entirely sure the best build, quite frankly. I do think like the newer versions of hybrid that have like just one Blizz, one Kalut may become too slow because the opportunity cost is you're just making your like oppression access and deck dev access worse. Like if you just run Blackwings with like a very tight like Grepher Arma package, like a tight value package with like a burial, you're just going to be resolving more deck devs, which I think is important, and your deck is more apt to run oppression, which I think is better. You can end the game more quickly. I haven't dropped like this list yet, but I've played enough of like both lists to know like the strengths and weaknesses. It bricks less. It's easier to side with. So I'm not entirely sure the direction of this deck, and frankly, I don't have a strong opinion on whether or not like this is like considerably better than pure Blackwings or pure value. I've talked about the weaknesses in the past, mostly siding type stuff, and deck construction. Like you have to make a lot of concessions with deck construction in most of these builds, which I don't necessarily like. Like when I play Blackwings, like I feel like I can fit every card I want in there and like have still like some flexibility for like draw traps or something. Like same with value. I feel like I'm always making some type of concession when I play the hybrid builds. Now I want to move on to I guess the second part of the video, which will be a lot shorter, which is the like side deck and like tech slots, we'll call them. So I do think DD Crow, if not main deck DD Crow, is going to become like at like a 2, like near staple. Maybe not 2 main decked, but like how are you ever gonna beat like Forgs or Gigaplant if you don't have DD Crow? Like how? Like you're never gonna beat it. Like you're just never gonna beat it. So like I just don't think between your 55 you can ever not have 2 Crow from now on. Um, Side deck cards, I think these decks are so divisive that the only way to beat them is oppression and deck dev. So I think that's going to further narrow the meta into bird decks and then the combo decks. So I think oppression and deck dev will continue to define the meta. And then the last thing I want to talk about is trap stun. I think this is part of the reason why combo decks are having so much success. It's just an incredibly powerful and versatile card that allows you to shut down broken back row floodgates, whether or not that's suppression or deck dev, and just pop off. Whether or not it's in Gladiator Beasts, there's been a huge push for like main deck trap stuns. Whether or not it's Forgs siding in trap stuns, Gigaplant having like a tech trap trap stun and one in the side. It's kind of just like it's like a cold wave that just doesn't stop you from doing what you want to do. So this card I think has been severely underplayed and underrated for an incredibly long time in this format. And I think like the high roll combo decks just it just makes them so much better. I think also from like a game balance like perspective, I'm not entirely sure these two cards should be in the format. Heavy Storm and True Knight I think are only going to cause problems, and I know like people just say like, oh, you just want to like helmet and like have your back row unprotected, but like at some point, like if these decks just become too prevalent and too high rolly, it's specifically because Heavy Storm and True Knight are in the format, supplemented by Trap Stun. So I'm not entirely sure. It's good game design to have these without like multiple solemns in the format. You know what I mean? So that's really all I wanted to talk about. I guess in summary, I think birds are a fantastic deck, still a top tier deck. Some games I feel like are becoming actually like too slow with Black Wings, which is insane. That led me to say, I think Vayu, like if birds become too slow, Vayu has to be built to be faster and enable your deck dev and oppression. Main decked, these two cards define the format in side decks, and these two are going to see considerably more play over the next year. Because they're new, they could even be further refined. I think that's going to usher a change in what side decks look like to include more cards like Crow. And it's going to push out a lot of decks that just can't compete on a combo front, whether or not that's like Diva Hero zombies or regular zombies or regular Diva Hero for that matter. And I also think that has very profound implications for slower decks like Frog Hero, which I think are going to, I won't say become obsolete, but I just think they're in a much weaker spot based on what their core game plan is, which is, incremental advantage and incremental plus ones, board wipes, but they don't play that great of a stun game just based on them not being able to run back row. And then I guess Lightsworn I think is still very underplayed just because if the meta becomes like combo decks and decks that can potentially stop those combos, Lightsworn can come in and sweep the dark decks. I think there's still a lot of work to be done on the hybrid builds. I personally think they should just become like a lot more aggro and less like combo reliant and high rolly. And run Kalut because it's the second best Blackwing, 3 of them. And then secondarily, I still see a lot of side decks that are not on 2DD Crow. I don't think that's acceptable at this point. I just think you're out of your mind if you. I mean, it might even be like a point where like we have to be on like 3DD Crow. Like honestly, like if you've seen like what Forgs and Gigaplant can do, like if you don't draw the DD Crow, you lose. So it's like you kind of have to open it. So it might just be like a 3DD Crow meta moving forward. And then Trapstun, I think, is more like from a historical perspective, one of the like most underplayed cards in Edison and has been and will continue to see a rise in popularity. So those are some of my thoughts. Thanks for watching.